Today we're going to talk about the prospect of Biden issuing preemptive pardons and how the media is missing the mark in its coverage of it. And I've got two interviews this week. I'm joined by Zateo's Mehdi Hassan to discuss the state of independent media, the impact that Israel-Gaza played in this election, and why Harris was punished when Trump is already assembling a cabinet of pro-Israel hawks. And I sit down with Congressman Ro Khanna to discuss where Democrats should spend their political capital resisting Trump, why he supports Trump's Doge Commission with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, and his thoughts on the DNC chair race. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. In the aftermath of Joe Biden granting his son Hunter a pardon, there's now talk about Biden issuing preemptive pardons for people who are possible targets in Trump's retribution tour, people like Adam Schiff and Liz Cheney and Anthony Fauci. Here's the deal, and this applies to Hunter the exact same way that it applies to Schiff and Fauci and Cheney. If you are more upset with Biden being forced to consider the extraordinary step of preemptorily pardoning his own officials and pardoning his son than you are about Trump appointing someone who has promised to use the federal government to exact personal retribution for Trump, then you are simply not paying attention. These Republicans who are trashing Biden as some lawless thug for pardoning Hunter act as if it's happening in a vacuum. It's not. It is happening expressly because the guy who Trump tapped for FBI director, for example, has a literal enemies list of people that he would try to prosecute using the government. You can't have fainting spells about the prospect of pardons without also acknowledging why those pardons are being considered in the first place. Which is not to say, by the way, that Joe Biden coming out beforehand and promising never to pardon Hunter wasn't a bad move, because it was. Like, I'm not going to defend him for lying. He clearly lied. And Joe Biden should have known better than to make some sweeping claim in advance about how he would never wield the pardon power, given that Donald Trump was probably going to staff his own cabinet with people who would carry out his vengeance tour. So, no, it's not something that I think is acceptable on Joe Biden's part, and it was stupid, and it makes everybody's lives more difficult defending him when he very clearly lied. But with all of that said, let's not fall into the same both sides bullshit that legacy media falls into. Yes, Joe Biden lied. No, him pardoning Hunter for lying on a gun application form is not the same as Trump's promises to pardon the January 6th insurrectionists for storming the Capitol and looking to kill Nancy Pelosi. No, him pardoning someone like Adam Schiff preemptively for the crime of Schiff presiding over Trump's impeachment trial is not the same as Trump having pardoned Michael Flynn and Roger Stone and Paul Manafort and Charles Kushner and Steve Bannon, George Papadopoulos, Rod Blagojevich, Joe Arpaio, Elliot Broidy, Dinesh D'Souza. Like, the list goes on and on. If you are acting in anything even resembling good faith, you will recognize that the two sides here are not the same. Granted, that won't stop these right-wing operatives from coming out and saying, oh, well, Biden pardoning Hunter now establishes the precedent that Donald Trump will be able to use to pardon everybody that he wants to pardon. Right, because Trump needed a precedent, because Trump wouldn't possibly have done anything corrupt unless he was absolutely sure that his actions were firmly rooted in precedent first. I mean, honestly, the only thing worse than Donald Trump's overt corruption are the people in the media who pretend that somehow that corruption wouldn't exist if not for the precedent established by the left. Again, the real story amid all of this isn't that Joe Biden pardoned his kid, which, yes, he lied about, and that was a shitty thing to do, but let's be honest, all of us would have done the exact same things if we were in Joe Biden's shoes, or that he's considering preemptorily pardoning other Trump enemies. It is that he has to, because Trump's presidency will be predicated on his ability to seek revenge on those very people. That is the story here. That is the part that the media is missing by refusing to look at the bigger picture. That's where this both sidesism drives me absolutely nuts. That's the part that lets me know that the media hasn't learned its lesson heading into another Trump era. If you can't say that Joe Biden lying about pardoning Hunter was bad, but that him being forced to pardon Hunter and to consider pardoning a raft of other people because they will very likely be the victims of political persecutions is objectively and exponentially worse, then you are just not able to meet the moment that we're in right now. So look, I know that if you've watched my videos before, you know how I feel about legacy media. You know how I feel about both sidesism. You know how I feel about the extent to which the right has learned how to game the refs in this country. And even worse, those refs' inability to actually recognize that they are being gamed. Like, I thought it was unacceptable during Donald Trump's first term, but at least they had some sense of plausible deniability given that we had never had a president like Trump before. But for them already be doing the exact same thing right now, 8 years into the Trump era, is just unacceptable at this point. And it's why I beat this drum constantly to support independent media, because legacy media isn't going to change. Like, what do they say about the definition of insanity? It's doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Putting our faith in people in legacy media who have shown us over and over and over that they are not interested in meeting this moment at some point becomes our fault, because we know how they're going to act. We know that they're not going to change. We know that they are stuck in this same mentality that they've been stuck in for the better part of a decade. So please subscribe to this channel if you're not yet subscribed. Subscribe to other independent media networks who are actually willing to meet this moment with the urgency that it deserves. And let's actually be prepared on how to fight back in the Trump era. Coming up next are previews of my interviews with Mehdi Hassan and Ro Khanna, but first, a reminder that what you're watching right now is my once weekly podcast. This is No Lie. Every other video on this channel is a regular breaking news video or an episode of Legal Breakdown or Democracy Watch, but once a week is this specific podcast called No Lie. Well, No Lie is now officially part of the Crooked Media Network, which is exciting for me because Pod Save America, for example, which is the flagship show on that network, has always been a huge inspiration for me, and I'm grateful to be a part of that team. But with my podcast joining their network, the host read ads that play on my audio version of my No Lie podcast will also play here. That means that on one video per week, just this one, there will be ads. So to that end, here's a quick word from some sponsors and then previews of my 2 interviews. No Lie is brought to you by ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol. We're heading toward the holidays. That inevitably means more drinking, which makes it especially tough to wake up feeling fresh. For that, I use pre-alcohol. So here's the deal. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. I was a skeptic. I was on the fence about pre-alcohol at first, but I first tried it in DC just this past summer, and I actually felt completely fine the next day, which I didn't think I was capable of anymore. So look, again, holiday season's upon us. We're going to be consuming a bit more alcohol than usual. Pre-alcohol helps you stay on track and not let the season throw you off course. Go to zbiotics.com/BTC to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use BTC at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/BTC and use the code BTC at checkout for 15% off. No Lie is brought to you by Lumen. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath, and on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management, which these days might come in handy. All right, so here's how it works. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time, and Lumen will give you tips to keep on top of your health game. And the reality is that if you're looking to make some New Year's resolutions, your diet and metabolism is most of the battle, which is why it's important that Lumen gives you recommendations to improve your metabolic health. So if you want to stay on track with your health this holiday season, go to lumen.me/BTC to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/BTC for 15% off your purchase. Lumen makes a great gift too. Thanks Lumen for sponsoring this episode. In an election where we did see such a pronounced swing to the right, but all across the country, to what extent you thought that the situation, the war in Gaza had an impact on Kamala's loss? And I asked this because
it's a great question.
We saw swings, we saw swings in Michigan, but at the same time, we saw commensurate swings down in Alabama, over in Utah. And so how do you kind of think about this?
It's a great question. I've been thinking about it. I think there's many layers to this, and I'll just keep it very simple. And I've actually changed my position a bit on this, Brian. So on election and after election, when I saw those swings, I said to a few friends of mine, including Muslim friends of mine, I don't think you can say Gaza made a difference this way or that way. She lost so badly, so across the board, so across every demographic that you can't just say it was Arab Americans in, Dearborn, Michigan, or whatever it is that swung it. I've actually changed my position a bit for 2 reasons. Number one, I do think Gaza was actually bigger than I thought it was. And I'll tell you why. Number one, look at the narrowness of the Rust Belt states, right? You can talk about national trends, great, but we all know national trends are irrelevant to who wins or loses. For Harris to win this election, all she had to do was win Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Trump won those states by 230,000 votes, ballpark, right? Across
Yeah.
those three states. So if 115 or 116,000 votes had switched from Trump to Harris, she would be president today. She wouldn't have won the popular vote. It would have been a great irony. The Democrats would have won the Electoral College, but not the popular vote. Republicans would be screaming about the Electoral College. But she would be president-elect right now if 115,000 switched from Trump. It was very, very narrow. Now, in that kind of narrowness, in those kind of Rust Belt states, yeah, I'm going to say, in a place like Michigan, she clearly could have won Michigan when it was that narrow, had she given something to the people there, some kind of hope, some kind of change on an issue that was central to their very existence. They were losing family members by the day in places like Gaza and Lebanon. So I do think it played a big role in some of those swing states, clearly not national. And number two, it's not about Gaza, the policy. Let's say you're not someone who pays attention to the Middle East. You're not someone who cares about the fate of Israelis or Palestinians, and you live in one of these swing states. You know what Gaza means? It doesn't mean a policy issue. It means change. Harris, just by switching on Gaza, would have showed she wasn't Joe Biden, right? That was one of the many areas where people were asking, well, where are you going to be different to Biden? And she couldn't answer the question. In fact, she doubled down on Biden policies on the Middle East. So even if you don't care about Gaza as a substantive topic, as a policy area, just the symbolism of her coming out and saying, I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to actually criticize Netanyahu publicly. I'm going to suggest that I'm going to enforce the law when I'm president on arms sales. Just that would have had an impact on the general tenor of her campaign, which was no change. I'm going to be the same as Biden. So I do think it played a big role, both directly in those swing states with those key voters and indirectly in terms of a big picture image in a very close election, a change election.
Mehdi, we'd spoken about the asymmetry in the media and Democrats being graded on a curve while Donald Trump kind of gets a pass. Trump had signaled in the campaign where his stance was on Israel versus Gaza. And now that he's in office, he's appointed, pro-Israel hawks to his cabinet between Marco Rubio, Elise Stefanik. And so can you explain why Kamala Harris took the brunt of the blame when it comes to Israel, Gaza, but Trump, who is either the same or worse, why he gets a pass, or why so many Arab American voters swung toward him?
And I think, well, a couple of things. One is I hear this all the time, and I understand why a lot of liberals, white liberals who don't follow this issue closely, are confused. Right? I get it.
Yeah.
And just factually, just be clear, he did win in Dearborn, but overall, according to the Fox exit poll, 65% of Muslim Americans voted for Harris. The majority, the Jews and Muslims voted Democrat. The only religious group that voted majority in every sect, Trump, was Christians. Christians voted for Trump. In every type of Christian group voted Trump, super majority, except for Catholics who were just a simple majority. So it slightly frustrates me when I see people saying, oh, Muslims did not vote for Trump. The majority of Muslims voted Democratic. Now, did he get a swing? Yeah, like he did in every demographic. And did in places like Dearborn, clearly they went for him because of Gaza? Yes. And the simple answer is, people don't play counterfactuals. Voters don't do that. They base it on what's happening in the here and now. And in the here and now, Joe Biden was president, Kamala Harris was vice president, and 42,000 people were killed on their watch with American weapons. And they showed very little empathy and very little support for these people. And I think that is fundamental. So when I said to people, I said what you said, Brian. I spoke to Muslim crowds in Philadelphia, in swing states. And I said, Trump's worse. And they very legitimately said, maybe he is, maybe he's not. We'll find that out. Right now, today, Biden's the one who's allowing our people to be killed. And I think that's a problem the Democrats have to recognize. And the funny thing is, the bar was so low. People here who've lost family members were not asking for Joe Biden to take Benjamin Netanyahu to the International Criminal Court to be punished. They were just saying, number one, feel our pain. Just have some empathy. You're supposed to be the empathy president. He didn't, Biden. Number two, just criticize Israel publicly like you would any other country. Like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are criticizing Israel. Why couldn't Joe Biden? And number three, on the policy front, if you're not going to do an arms embargo, at least talk about the importance of international law, American law. Kamala Harris ran as a prosecutor. All she had to say was, of course, I support the president of the United States. I'm not undermining Joe Biden, but when I'm president, I'm going to enforce the law. That's all she had to say. Enforce the law, because our arms sales to Israel are a violation of American law. They're a violation of the Leahy Act. They're a violation of the Foreign Assistance Act. That's all she had to say. The bar was so low. People were not asking for that much. They were asking for just the bare minimum. And that Harris and Biden couldn't give them the bare minimum is both a moral outrage and electoral insanity.
In terms of these nominations to cabinet positions, and especially in light of Kash Patel's nomination to lead the FBI, and knowing that Democrats have limited political capital to work with here, given that we're in the minority in both houses of Congress and, of course, the White House, who do you think it's most useful to spend our time resisting here?
Well, we need to ask tough questions of at least three of the nominees. First is Kash Patel. And what we need to make sure is that there's not retribution in the FBI. I mean, that he commits very clearly to following norms and not using the resources of the government to go after Trump's enemies. The second, in my view, is RFK, to make sure he doesn't start firing en masse NIH officials who are doing research on vaccines, and that he doesn't interfere with schools giving vaccines. And the third would be Tulsi Gabbard, to make sure that we have a clear sense of her views on Ukraine and her views on Putin.
Well, the pushback to that would be, let's start with Kash Patel first of all. I mean, he's already come out and said what he intends to do at the FBI. So do you think that it's enough to just hope that he, when he needs to answer questions for a certain audience, just says, oh yeah, of course I'll defer to protecting the norms, when we have quotes from him, coming out and saying outright, we will go out and find the conspirators. Yes, we are going to come after the people in the media. So this is his promise to enact Donald Trump's retribution tour, even against journalists and lawyers, for the crime of acknowledging objective reality about the 2020 election. So is it enough to just say, well, okay, as long as he answers to our liking when we ask him about norms, then there's not going to be a problem?
Well, Brian, first of all, I'm not clear that he'll answer to our liking. So
that's fair also.
Let's have him in there and let's confront him with these questions, and then make a determination. The one hope that people will follow the rule of law and not just be lapdogs for Donald Trump is there is going to be a future administration. They saw the consequences for everyone other than Donald Trump, for many people who engaged in criminal or wrongful conduct. And I hope that is some check on these people.
To watch the full interviews with Mehdi Hasan and Ro Khanna, click the thumbnails right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also click the link on the screen for the audio version of this episode, and of course, to see more of my content, the subscribe button's on the screen as well.